It is Friday, and on Fridays we do snap or pass on the new cards that are going to be coming out next week. And the next card that's going to be released in Marvel Snap is Black Knight, a 1/2. After you discard a card, add the Ebony Blade, which I'll show you in a sec, to your hand with that card's power. This is going to occur once per game. That line of text has some very interesting implications that I've come to realize after asking the devs some questions. So there's some really important details in the mechanics that you will not want to miss. Okay, we're going to cover the mechanics, counters, and I got some deck lists for you guys here today on the Black Knight if you choose to pick up this Series 5 card. This card is going to cost you 6,000 tokens should you choose to pick it up with tokens. But you also have the option to use spotlight caches to pick up the Black Knight if you're interested in it. And this week, I don't know. Now, this has already happened before. We've already had a spotlight cache week that was running MODOK and Stature. And they're doing it again. It's a repeat, and it's probably because these are staple cards in a lot of discard lists. So it kind of makes sense to pair it with a discard card, but I find it a bit underwhelming. If you don't have these cards, then it's not too bad, right? Then maybe you're a little bit happier to open up a cache, but they are Series 4. They're only costing 3,000 tokens. You can get both of these for the same price as getting the Black Knight. So just manage your resources the way you feel you need to. MODOK is definitely worthwhile owning if you do not own him. For a lot of discard lists, Stature you could probably pass on, not so necessary. But there you go, those are the possible options. But how do I feel about the Black Knight? Well, I gotta say this is probably going to be the most controversial Snapper Pass, or one of the most controversial Snapper Pass videos I've done in a while, because I'm not fired up about this card. I love the artwork, my goodness, that Peach Momoko goes hard, but like, I just don't know about the Black Knight. It seems like there's too many steps here, and it feels like it's already doing what discard has already done before. So it just is giving me a lot of win more vibes. And I'm going to get into some scenarios of why that is the way it is. But we have to look at the Ebony Blade and what this card actually looks like. All right, so here's the Blade. So it's a 4/0, and that's going to have reasonably big implications. Okay, so worth noting that the base cost of it is a 4, and it has 0 power. Unless something is discarded, right? Because that's the whole point. You want to discard something when you have the Black Knight on the field to get a big blade into your hand, preferably. If not, becomes 20 power. That's the dream that everybody's talking about, and there's all these crazy scenarios, which looks a lot of fun, but I'm worried about the consistency. Another thing about the Blade is that it has no ability. This kind of has implications, but I don't think it's going to end up being a very big deal. The biggest, scenario where you're going to see this actually come into effect is where Washington, D.C. is a location in your match. You can play the Blade there to get +3 power. So that's kind of nice. The other one is Patriot, but I really doubt you're running Patriot with the Black Knight. So if you want to go crazy and try that one out, be my guest. Very unlikely do we see the two paired together. All right, so that's the Blade and that's the Black Knight. Let's get into some mechanics surrounding these cards. One of the most important mechanics about the Black Knight that might seem quite obvious, but I want to go over it anyways, is that the Black Knight needs to be on the board to activate. So if the Black Knight is chilling in your deck or in your hand and you discard something, it's not going to remember when you play the card and then generate a blade based on the power of the card that you previously discarded. It's not like the first card that you ever discard is going to just generate a blade when the Black Knight hits the board. It's afterwards, right? So you play the Black Knight, you discard something, it generates the blade to your hand, which I'm getting ahead of myself, but I do want to talk about this quite a bit, is that is one of the problems that I see with this card. It's one of the cons. It requires 2 support cards. There's no getting around this, okay? You have the Black Knight, you need a discard activator, preferably something that can target discard like Lady Sif or the Blade. So you got to draw one of those, have it in your deck, draw it, play it. Then you're going to want something that has high power in your hand, the target. Right? So Infinite, Epoch, there's a lot of options. Luckily, there's, discard lists that naturally do this anyways, so you're probably going to be fine, but there's no getting around it. You need 2 support cards to get a good effect off of the Black Knight. Another thing is about the Blade itself. So we already talked about how it has no ability and it can get buffed from Patriot, but also the fact that it has a 4 as a base cost means you can discount it with Sabu. And a crazy combo, one of the highest potentials with this card is that you can also discount the Ghost Rider. So you discard with Lady Sif your Infinite, that's 20 power blade into your hand, 320, Then on turn 6, you play Ghost Rider, who's a 3/3, brings back the Infinite, and you play a 3/20 blade. That's crazy, right? That is 43 net power on the board on turn 6. That's probably going to win you a handful of games, but of course you have to draw a lot of cards and play them in the correct order to pull that one off. It also has a base power of 0, meaning that Shadow King is a very nasty counter. If you throw the blade out there and Shadow King hits it, even if it was a 20 power Infinite that you discarded, the blade's looking like a 4/20, doesn't matter. You're going down to 0. Ouch, that's gonna hurt. But here are some really interesting mechanics with the Black Knight that I had to ask the devs about to get confirmation on. So if you have 2 Black Knights, 3, 4, but actually it doesn't really matter, however many Black Knights that you want on the board, you're going to get that many blades back to your hand when you discard something. I wasn't too sure, and the reason I wanted to ask is because this is the first card in the game ever printed that very specifically says the exact text of once per game. And I thought because they're really highlighting that, they're putting it in the card, that maybe it had bigger implications than some other once per game, effects that have already previously been in the game. A few examples are like Nightcrawler, Jeff, even Spider-Man 2099 as a kind of a roundabout example, but those kind of trigger once per game. But check this out, okay? So if Phoenix Force resurrects a spent Black Knight, so a Black Knight that has already generated a blade into your hand, and you discard a card, it will not generate a blade. You're not going to get another one, okay? So it's already recognizing that you've spent it. You've used the Black Knight up. Even though you got destroyed and resurrected, does not matter. You're not getting a second blade. So that is definitely not a strategy that you want to be trying to pull off. Another one that might have actually been viable if it worked is bouncing the Black Knight back to your hand to then discard something and get another blade. I don't know how it'd work in a deck, but it's not going to function mechanically, okay? So let's say you have the Black Knight out there, you discard something, you get a blade to your hand, then you use Falcon to bounce it back to your hand, or Beast, or whatever it is, and then you play it again. You would think maybe if I discard something else, I'll get a second blade to my hand. You will not. It's not going to work that way, okay? So those are 2 instances where the Black Knight, once that one Black Knight gets you 1 Ebony Blade, that is it. It's spent, it's done, no matter what happens. If you generate a copy, that has its own trigger, okay? So it's going to look for another activation of a discard and get you another blade. That's how the Black Knight works. So let's talk about some pros and some cons of the Black Knight. Okay, so I've already kind of led into the cons because I think they're the most worth talking about. But some of the pros is that this is just, it's a small card. It's a 1-cost card that can grow into a big swing. But let's talk about the power here, okay? So obviously the Dream is Infinite or APOC. Those are great because then you're getting, at your worst, a 4/12 with the APOC line or a 4/20 with the Infinite and, some other synergies that we already talked about, Sabu, whatever else. Doesn't matter. We're just looking at the power of the blade, okay? So 12, 20, that's pretty good. Of course, that's very good. You did have to spend the Black Knight energy, so that's 1. We can't forget about that, but you did get 2 power. So if we put that all together, and let's just use the Infinite example, it's everyone's favorite, you're looking at spending 5 energy in a normal instance for 22 power. Very nice. I like that a lot. I think a lot of people should enjoy that stat line. Another instance is the Black Cat. Right? I see that as being a very synergistic card with the Black Knight because you then don't need that second support card. She's just going to do it herself. She's going to discard herself, and that's going to be the high power card that you needed. So that's 9, right? She just recently got buffed. That's 9 power. So then you're looking at 11 power for that 5 energy. Is that worth it? And maybe that's good enough. 11 power for 5. Maybe that's all that we need out of this card. And then, the other support cards to help it out. It's also a card going back to the hand. So Collector possibly that has, popped into some discard lists. We're also looking at discarding something. So Morbius gets +2 power. There's some roundabout synergies, but that's kind of what you're looking on the low end, I would say, of the power. Anything under that, then I don't know if it's worthwhile territory. 10, 9 power for 5 energy, essentially what you're net spending. So I don't love that. So I would say like Black Kite's on the low end, and then APOC, Infinite, these sorts of things are what we're aiming for. There is a lot of talk about Hela. Here's the thing about Hela, and kind of just adding to what I think about this card. It's a win more to add Black Knight into your Hela list. Like, here's the problem with Hela, not the power that you dish out. Hela has been one of the most winning cards in the history of Marvel Snap when played. It's always been at the top. Has no problem dishing out enough power to win a game when Hela actually hits the board. The problem is drawing her, drawing the discard activator, drawing that invisible woman, not getting countered by your opponent. That is the problem with Hela decks and why they don't take off, and they're not consistent enough to take off. Black Knight's not helping at all with that, right? We're just hoping to discard something after we've already played the Black Knight to get another high power thing into our hands so that we can discard that again so that Hela can regenerate it, which is cute, but like, who needs that? We don't need that extra power. That's just adding more to a state of board that we were going to win anyways. It was already in the bag, and now we just added more steps to it. In fact, I would argue that Black Knight might actually hinder the consistency of a Hela deck, because now you have the potential to draw that Black Knight on turn 4, 5, or 6, possibly ruining your curve, possibly ruining your opportunities to draw Hela. Just look at a typical Hela list and like ask yourself, what am I taking out to put in the Black Knight, right? One of those high power cards. But what if I never get to activate the Black Knight? What if I don't get the opportunity to play him? Now, instead, I'm going to use my MODOK, discard a bunch of things. I'm discarding a 2-power card that's going to come back instead of the Blade or something else like a Giganto, or I don't know, just a bunch of things. So yeah, I'm not in love with that line of play either for the Black Knight, even though it seems at first glance very appetizing, very interesting to play with. But it is, like, as one of my pros, it is a power boost to the discard archetype. It is a way to get a lot of power onto the board. And it does sort of fit naturally in some of the things that discard wants to do. A lot of discard lists want to use Lady Sif to hit that 8-block. There you go. 12 power Ebony Blade. We're laughing. That's good value. We're happy. So in those terms, I like the card a lot. Another thing that I don't like about the card, I know I keep talking to things I don't like, but it's very narrow in its viability. There's a lot of deck building challenges. This is a discard card through and through. You need 2 support cards, high power, and a discard activator unless you're running Black Cat. And like, where else do you fit the Black Knight? You're not putting them in Destroy 1-2, maybe. I don't know if you're crazy. Maybe there's a hybrid out there. Maybe there's more than I'm not seeing, but I ultimately think this is going to maybe find home in 1 or maybe 2 tier 1, 2, tier 2 decks. Like, I think it has the potential to, you know, make it up there in the tiers, but you're not splashing this in a bunch of decks. You're going to have a Black Knight deck, and I don't think you're going to have many more other than that. So that's where I'm not in love with this card, and it's already kind of doing things that discard already does. So that's how I feel. That's the mechanics with the Black Knight, but let's talk about some counters. All right, so I'm going to rip through this pretty quick because I've already covered quite a few of these counters, but essentially we've got Killmonger because it's a 1 cost. If it gets destroyed before we can discard something, you're not getting any value out of the Black Knight. Shadow King can absolutely ruin the Blade right above me. So can Shang-Chi, because we're probably looking to get 9 or more power out of our Blade and he can destroy it. Silver Samurai, sneaky little counter. You could even look at like Moon Knight or even Black Bolt to some degree. Just, you know, making us discard something that we did not want to discard. I picked Silver Samurai in particular because he's looking for the lowest power card, which if that's the first card that we end up discarding with the Black Knight on the field, we're going to get a very low power Ebony Blade, which we do not want. So that's kind of a roundabout counter, possibly. Another one is Cosmo, because not necessarily because the Black Knight has an on reveal, but because, again, we need that discard activator. The only way around that is with Black Cat. So Cosmo could deny the activation of the discard, which means we're going to have to find another way, which is clunky, awkward. It's going to get tricky. So it's a pretty big counter. And lastly, I got Leader here. That's because if we don't happen to discount the Ebony Blade, and the plan is to just play that plus something small on turn 6, Leader can just copy the Blade, get all its power, good to go. So you gotta watch out for that. I don't think Leader's that popular enough. I think all these other counters are popular enough, especially the top 3 are, you know, being consistently put in a lot of lists right now. So that might give Black Knight a hard time. All right, so I do have some decks here, and I have to be honest, I try to be as creative as possible to, you know, branch out and provide multiple decks for these brand new cards. But like I was saying, there's such a narrow application with this card, and maybe I'm just, you know, got like writer's block and I can't see some of the value with this card. I'm perfectly happy to admit that. I would love to see that, but I just feel like it's going to fall in one of these decks or something, a very similar shell to these lists. So key synergies, of course, Lady Sif, Blade as well. Those two are like my top two for discard activators for the Black Knight. I feel like they're necessary. I feel like you have to run those in your list with the Black Knight unless you're doing some other shenanigan like the Hela list I have here. Ghost Rider, fantastic value. I have it in every single list here because if we can bring back whatever that high power thing is, that's just good value. Zabu, amazing. Infinite, prime target that we want to hit. APOC, a fantastic target as well. That works pretty nicely in a lot of lists with discard. So this is what I got. Discard, ... question mark. Because I don't think it's going to work in this list, to be honest with you. It's a little awkward because this list, classic discard, looks to aim to discard swarms, right? Or use MODOK on the final turn to discard a whole bunch of things. If we're lucky, we'll draw Blade and we'll have APOC on the right, or Infinite, right? Or we're going to have Lady Sif and we can use that to discard one of those cards as well. But I just don't know about the consistency. I do love Dracula with this card as well. Just, you know, having the Blade in the hand, letting Dracula pick, that's not too shabby. With the APOC, with America Chavez, we'd have 3 options in the hand, probably going to hit something pretty big, pretty good. But again, like what discard wants to do typically is you use MODOK on 5 and then you use a bunch of swarms, however many you were able to generate, and the Dracula discards your APOC and you play America Chavez on turn 6. That's essentially it. A bunch of swarms, America Chavez, Dracula discards the APOC. That's a lot of power on the board. That's the game plan. How does the Blade fit in there? How does the Black Knight fit in there? If we already discarded something, we generated the Black Knight, it's in our hand, or the Blade that is, and turn 5, MODOK discards it anyways. It's another hit on Morbius maybe, so that maybe there's a roundabout value there. I don't love it. There's also a pretty tight curve here, you know? Like on turns 4, you want to be playing Dracula. You know, turn 2, you want to play your Morbius. And if we want to use the Blade, we want to use Clean Wing, Lady Sif. All those other little turns are already too tight, too used up. So I don't actually love it in that list. My favorite list, and I genuinely think this is the one that's going to take off some version of this, is the Value Knight. So the concept, I've actually been running this list without the Black Knight to great success, and I feel like this is just going to do well as well, because my favorite line for Black Knight is using Black Cat. I really think the two pair beautifully together. And of course, you could draw the Black Cat before you draw the Knight. That's going to suck, of course. But we have other options. And I have a lot of options to cheat those high power cards out, like Jubilee, right? Jubilee can cheat it out. Ghost Rider can bring it back. Dracula can absorb the power if it's still in our hand at the end of the game. Black Cat's just going to dip out of our hand, hopefully activate and give us a Blade that's good value. We discount with Zabu. We get those cards out there on turn 6. I feel like this is the best possibility for this list. I've got Magneto here because he's just a nice pull. You know, you can just pull things around from your opponent's side of the board, but you could really replace that with like a Giganto or even a Hulk, or I don't know, whatever you feel more comfortable with in that position. Just a high power card is what we're looking for there. So I think this is going to be the best shell in my mind, but time will tell. I've already talked about the Hela and how I feel about that. I just don't think it's worth putting Black Knight in the list, but this is how I imagine it would look, right? Pretty typical Hela. You got magic to extend the game so you get more draws. You got Invisible Woman with the MODOK and then the Hela play. Like, that's kind of what you want to do, right? Maybe there's a world where you put the Black Knight under the Invisible Woman. So you would do something. I don't even know how this would exactly go, but I guess it would be Invisible Woman, Black Knight, MODOK, and then Hela. And somehow if you discard the Lady Sif, she discards the Blade again and Hela brings it all back. I don't know. Probably none of that works. And that's why I just don't feel very good about this card. There's just like weird consistency things. The stars need to align. You have to get all the right combos. So anyways, despite everything that I'm saying, is this card, is the Black Knight a snap or pass? All right, so I'm putting Black Knight as a pass. Here's the thing, guys. Here's the biggest concern and my leading thought with this card. When this is released, you're going to see highlights on YouTube, highlights on Twitch, all kinds of crazy stuff where these creators or whoever else, friends, anyone playing this card is going to hit the dream. They're going to dish out insane amounts of power. They're going to have like 2 blades that are 40 power, and they're going to bring back the Infinite with Ghost Rider, and it's going to be nuts, right? They're going to do a crazy Hela play that brings back all the cards plus the Blade. Even though they won without the Blade, it's going to look insane because the Blade kind of helped. And I just think it's going to create this perception that this card is really good. I don't think it's going to be bad by any means. I think it will find a list that can make it work, and as a result, we'll have a decent win rate. It's very narrow in where it's going to find a home, and it's got consistency issues. It's going to be a little bit trickier to pull off. You need certain things to happen. You need those cards to be drawn, to be played, to make the most out of this card. And that's, I don't love cards like that in Snap, basically. I like those cards that can, you know, stand alone or have 1-2 combos, not 1-2-3 combos. so I'm just, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know. I mean, come on. This could easily be a pretty good card. The other thing is it's Series 5 and it's 6,000 tokens. So for me, I'm like trying to save tokens. You know, I'm not too into it. I'm passing. So there you go. Let me know how you feel about the card in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. As always, we do this every single week with Snap or Pass. The next one's going to be Nico Minoru, and that is going to be on Saturday. We're going to be slightly behind our gratification coming up. So I will catch you guys then. Thank you so much for watching. Catch you later.